Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming and hopefully staying awake as you get over your beer or whatever you had during the break. Standards for authorship. You might be saying, haven't we been talking about authorship forever? And in fact, we have in many journals. I think the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors have talked about authorship since probably 1990. But nonetheless, the reality is that there are a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different publications, and just recently the National Academy of Sciences decided to look into this or to try to come up with some standards. And I think it's important to note that how this ties into data and open data and many of the things we've talked about is that in order to promote integrity and stability in publishing, it's really important that all stakeholders are clear on their roles and that you have some agreed upon rules and norms, which helps the enterprise remain stable and consistent, and that we increase transparency about and confidence in the published literature. And there's been a lot of talk about that recently. So I think that's one of the reasons that these things all come together. Authorship, data, software code, they're all very important to the total stability of our enterprise. So the reason that there are these new standards is that the National Academy of Sciences just in the spring have released this new white paper called Fostering Integrity in Research. We've been talking about this for a while. The Council of Science Editors had a white paper, I think it's about its third edition, about the same thing, promoting integrity in journals. But I think it's really important that at the level of the National Academy of Sciences, which is across all of our different sciences, and engineering and medicine, have decided to take a look at it. And from that, there were a couple of recommendations related to authorship, and those include that journals need to improve and update authorship policies to respond to threats to integrity. We need to disclose roles and contributions, and that we should look to developing policies that would thwart what are considered detrimental research practices, such as ghost authorship, honorary authorship, and things like that. So Marcia McNutt, the current president of the National Academy of Sciences, pulled together a retreat in February with support from the Annenberg Foundation with the purpose of bringing editors from a lot of the top journals across all scientific disciplines. So we had a couple interdisciplinary journals, we had medical journals, we had basic research in biomedicine, in earth and space sciences, in chemistry, we had social sciences represented. So to see if we could find some common ground where there could be a standard that kind of everybody could work towards. And out of that has come these new standards, which have a white paper that's called Transparency to Authors' Contributions and Responsibilities to Promote Integrity in Scientific Publication. This is a preprint on the bioRxiv, and the authors are all the attendees of that meeting, and we did include our contributions if you'd like to see what our statements are. The idea was to sort of come up with some proposals around standards, and the hope is that people will in fact comment on this at bioRxiv, and we can develop it further and encourage journals then to sign on to these. So the main topics that were touched on were regarding journals' roles were that journals should provide standards for authorship, they should list responsibilities for corresponding authors. They should adopt credit, which I'll talk a little bit about more, and also include the credit information in metadata, and also require ORCID IDs for authors. There's also a little bit of talk in the white paper about the roles of different groups, including institutions, and there was particularly the feeling that, by the time it gets to the journal, it's in some sense a little late. I mean, we can set up policies to try to change behaviors prior to submission, but by the time it's submitted, you hope the authorship issues have already been dealt with. Most of us know that that's not always the case, and some of the most difficult things to work through are authorship disputes. So what we're encouraging is for institutions to have regular conversations on the criteria for authorship, and to begin that from the very beginning of the development of the research idea, of the proposal and things like that, and to encourage it. That's a really important behavior change. One, I think people have been pushing for a long time. I hope that, the Academy's really pushing on this will help change that behavior, because often these disputes are because conversations did not happen, expectations weren't set, and people really all have a different idea of what they contributed or what their role was and how much credit they will get for their role. So, so why implement this, now? And I think I've covered some of these already, but I think we do recognize that the community is really demanding a lot of information about transparency, and authorship has lagged behind in that regard. In some ways, there's been more push for data sharing and open data, and even just total open articles. And I think it's also that the trends towards more authors per manuscript make it even more difficult. And where the line is between an author and a contributor, and particularly if that authorship has a huge role in your future career, it becomes very important. Also, that authorship conventions vary immensely across the fields. It was very interesting. Some of these comments that I'm sharing with you came from Marcia McNutt, who gave this similar talk at the Council of Science Editors. It was her keynote. So those of you who already heard it, please feel free to read your email right now. It's okay. But for those of you who didn't, I will catch you up. But anyway, what she was saying when she came to science, well, not only when she came to science, but in her field, it was the first author, and then everybody was sort of listed, and if you were the last author, you were the last author. So she was very surprised to find out that in biomedicine, the first author was important, and the last author was the PI and was important. And she, it's like just showed how different fields designate the author, the way the authors are listed, and they mean different things. And nobody knows. A geologist does not know what it means in biomedicine any more than a biomedicine person might know what a huge space team, who did what in space research. The other thing was that there was a sense that we were at an opportunity to capture data using metadata in a way that can then be transferable and can be used for other purposes. So it can be independently verified what your contribution was to a paper, and it could help when young researchers, or any researcher, no matter where you are in your field, to document for any particular paper what your particular contribution was. And it's not something that sort of has to be remembered or rediscussed every time somebody looks at your CV. Like, what did they really do on that paper? They're author number 5. What does that mean? And so the hope was that it could be more clear. So one of the things, the white paper includes a few things, so including a recommendation that journals include a statement of how you should credit authors for a paper. Now, most of you will notice that these are very similar to standards that you've heard from from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. They're very similar to what we have and a lot of other journals have. I think the part that we had a lot of discussion around was whether it's that you had to do all of them or some of them, so the use of and or. You'll notice that these 4 are all and I didn't have any beer. All 4 are separated by the word or. Okay, so you can all read them. I don't need to read them to you, but I think you'll recognize them. The part that was then added is then we have 2 things that say and has approved the submitted version and any substantially modified version that involves the author's contribution to the study, and an author agrees to be personally accountable for the author's own contributions and for ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work, even ones in which the author was not personally involved, are appropriately investigated, resolved, and documented in the literature. So there was a very strong feeling in the working group this need to make sure, while you're giving individual credit, that there is also group joint responsibility. And so that's kind of what you see in that last bullet point, that you have to be responsible for ensuring the integrity and correcting the literature when necessary. And then the other piece that actually for us is going to be, we've never actually documented in any of our information for authors, is what exactly does the corresponding author do? And there was a feeling that that should be uniform and that should be stated. And so this white paper is also making recommendations that you ensure that all the listed authors have received and approved the manuscript. The corresponding author makes sure that all authors receive all the substantive correspondence with the editors as well as full reviews. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody said, I never saw the reviews, I didn't know. And also that they verify that all data, materials, including reagents, and code, even those developed and provided by other authors, comply with the transparency and reproducibility standards of both the field and the journal. I think this is really important. It's sort of saying one person, right now we know that most papers have numerous collaborations. Labs can be in different parts of the world. You may not really know what exactly happened with some set of experiments. You may not even have the complete ability and expertise to judge that part of it. But as the corresponding author, you at least have this discussion with every sort of head of each lab that's collaborating, that they are aware and they agree to the standards of reproducibility and transparency. This is something we're going to have to address. So what we're really saying is we're making the corresponding author a manager to manage the requirements across the author group. And that includes ensuring that the original data materials included upon the submission, that original materials, data materials and code upon which the submission is based are preserved and retrievable for reanalysis. Confirm that the presentation of the paper of the data materials code accurately reflects the original data materials and code. And you foresee and minimize obstacles to the sharing of data materials and code, and that you ensure that the entire group is fully aware of and in compliance with best practices. Particularly this foreseeing and minimizing, I don't know about the rest of you, we have a lot of problems at the very end. You find out somebody has a material transfer agreement they signed, never thinking about the fact that that will prevent them from doing or complying with the journal's requirement for sharing. And so I think this is part of the idea of like raising awareness, getting these discussions happening before submissions, and making sure someone takes responsibility that these discussions happen and these agreements are actually reviewed. And we've, in this white paper, the suggestion is the corresponding author takes on that responsibility. How am I doing for time? And I think the other big piece of this is just the importance of standardized metadata, and that's why they're recommending the use of credit and ORCID. Credit, for those of you who don't know, it's the contributor role taxonomy, and it has like 14 different categories of what you did or how you contributed to the paper. Not all of them might qualify you for authorship. I mean, there might be that you are a contributor and not an author, but the suggestion was that that metadata taxonomy be used for authorship as well, so that there is some standardization across journals, and that it can then be put in the XML of the paper and can transfer downstream to be to be shown. It can, and there are some really already. PLOS is doing this. They have a really nice implementation. You can roll over an author's name and actually see which how they contributed based on the taxonomy. It's really very lovely implementation. And the feeling was that we need to start getting things in the metadata of the actual paper, so it travels with it. And a lot of we're not saying that you should stop putting things in the acknowledgement and using author initials if that's what works for your journal. But in addition to that, we really push for the metadata to increase the value of that information. And then there was also a feeling that over time, we may find that we want that taxonomy, or we can see ways that that taxonomy can be expanded, could include micro attributions, things like that. As we learn and use it more, I think, and it's also a standard, it's an ISO standard, so there's a process by which it could be developed over time to be even more, embrace more kinds of contributions, perhaps the extent of the contribution and things like that. I think yeah, I think that, and so just my last slide is in terms of implementation. Basically, for us at Science, we now have 6 journals. That alone is like a whole new thing for us, to have to talk to all these other editors and decide what we're going to do. So we'll have to discuss this white paper and determine if we're all on board, and if there's areas that we see that might be problematic, and how would we address those. I'm feeling that probably that there won't be any problem with it, but it will require discussions, and we currently have nothing in our information for authors about what is the role of the corresponding author. I mean, that's kind of an archaic term in many ways just from who like put the paper in the mail back in the day, right? Who made the 3,000 Xerox copies, right? And who developed the figures. But it's got a much different meaning now. Also that we already have our authorship contribution forms embedded within our manuscript submission and tracking system. We have to, we would have to redo all that. We would have to swap out, and use and implement credit in some way within that. We'd have to then develop also workflows and do a better job. Currently, it's not exported out of our manuscript tracking system into our XML so that it could travel downstream. We would have to then also develop ways to display it on our website. So it would be a process to do this, but I think it's really worth it. The hardest part is actually going to be getting buy-in from the rest of the AAAS with whom we compete for resources, that this should be a priority within our IT group, within just resources in general. And usually that's always the hardest part, because it's not like you can say, oh, I'm going to increase revenue by X because I'm going to do this. You have to say, because we believe in the integrity of the scientific record, we need to do this. So I will stop there.